let's continue, right? Um, one option we were discussing in the last session is about working with the mouse events and the key events. How do we manage these events? So just one example I will give you how to deal with them. Already key events, one example we have learned. So working with the key events. So in the mouse events also, just we have to deal with the options. So like mouse over, mouse out, mouse down, mouse up. Yesterday we were discussing about mouse down and mouse up, how we can handle them. Uh, to handle the mouse events like mouse down and mouse up. So we are creating two functions, zoom in and zoom out. And in the zoom out function, so we are defining the height. So height and height as again 100 pixels, and width, we are defining width again as 100 pixels. So that is the height and width. So we have two functions here. One is zoom in, zoom out. These are the options. Now we need to handle these events. We need to handle these events on click. So on click, we need to manage the events and handle the events. So mouse down and up. So here for the image, so we are configuring those events. So that means we are defining the options like mouse down. So on mouse down, so what should happen? So zoom in should be called. And similarly, so we have mouse up. On mouse up, again we have zoom out. Zoom out must be called. That's how we need to configure the event. So this is generally how we manage the events and configure the events. So managing and configuring the events. So similarly, you can handle all other events. So we can manage all other events and work with those different types of events. So project is equal to Amazon. Okay. So this is one example on mouse down and mouse up. So the other miscellaneous events, all events are same like JavaScript events. Like JavaScript events, so all other events, the miscellaneous events, like we have blur, we have focus, we have change, so we have cut, copy, paste, so we have select start, we have submit, so we have click, so click, and DBL click, double click, so context menu is for right click. These are all JavaScript miscellaneous events. All these events are same as you use in JavaScript. They're all same as you use in JavaScript. Already few events I showed you in different examples, like blur, like focus, like change. So those events already we discussed in few examples. When value changes of drop down, so when focus on blur, in the last session we discussed. So all these are similar to JavaScript. We need to know only one important event, so that is very important to understand and use. that is about the submit event. That is about the submit event. Here, let's see. So we designed one example here, and we are configuring this. Yeah. And we designed a image here. This is an image. So mouse down, mouse up. When I hold down the mouse button on this image, then it should zoom, and up it should stop. That means on mouse down it should zoom, it should change, and mouse up it should again retrieve. That means the size need to be adjusted for that. So that means we need to call the function. So that is mouse down, the zoom in, and mouse up, so the zoom out. So these are the functions so defined for that particular image. So here, so the zoom in, so we'll change the size of the image, height and width of the image, and zoom out will set the image. And here we are not defining. Suppose we are configuring the image height and width here. By default, some image height and width is defined here. Height and width is defined here. And let's go to the CSS and make sure we don't have any height and width configured for this. So let's go into this and see the object height and width. So how we defined 100 pixel, 400 pixel. Okay, let's see this. Right now this zoom object should be applied. Zoom object should be applied to that image. That means the image should affect. Then we have to use the style. Let's put the style ng style. Ng style, it comes from the zoom object. That means we need to apply the height and width for it. Now once you configure this, now you can see when I hold down the button, it will zoom the image. And when I release, so again it will be normal. When you hold down the button, it will display, and release, it will be normal. So that means the zoom will happen when you hold down the button. And when you release the button, again it will be normal. That means on mouse down and on mouse up. So we are changing its size. We can change the size, we can change the positions, we can handle all these options, right? So this is general thing. This is general. All events are similar. All events are similar. So cut, copy, paste, select, start, click, double click, context menu. Suppose you want to handle double click. So I'm not giving any specific because already you know in JavaScript how to handle them. Suppose double click. So what should happen here is I just given an image. So image source is equal to assets slash some shoe.jpg, and width is equal to 100. Height is equal to 100. And when I double click on the image, it should open its actual size. Then here I'm writing an event on double click, on double click. This on double click, it should open that image in a separate window. Then I am using window.open method. It is a JavaScript method, and it should open assets in assets shoe.jpg, and its name should be Nike. Okay, and its width is some 400, and height is some 300. So this is on double click. We want this functionality to happen. So we are using just JavaScript open function to open the window. So let's go here, and we have to write here the event is DBL click. DBL click is double click. On double click, we are defining the option on double click. That means when user double clicks on that particular image, double click on that particular image, it opens in a separate window. You can see it opens in a separate window. So that means we are defining different events and we are handling different events. So that means on mouse over, on mouse over, on mouse out, on mouse over and mouse out, we are pausing the animation, mouse down and mouse up, and on double click, so we are handling the interaction. So if you are good in, you already know, so JavaScript events, all these events are same. In the similar way, we can handle them. In the similar way, we can use them. So no need to explain much about all these other events. Situation wise, we will be using them in different examples. Already we used them in few examples. How do we work and how do we deal with them? All are same. This all comes under event binding. But what is one important you need to understand is about the submit event. About the submit event. So this is important to understand. Actually, submit event, it fires up on form submit, and Angular introduced a new event. Angular introduced a new event, submit. Angular introduced a new event, submit. So this is available from Angular 9 version, and the ability of submit is to submit the form. That means it is used for form. It is used for form element, and defines actions to perform on form submit. So this is one important. You can use submit or you can use submit. Others we use just as they are available in JavaScript. We don't have any special option, but submit we define by using this technique. So generally submit is configured. So submit is defined and configured by using this technique. So let's see one example of a submit event. I am adding one component here. So ng generate component submit demo. Okay, so I'm just adding a component here. So let's design this component. Yes. So submit demo. Fine. And keep this in the startup. Okay, submit demo. Yes. Fine. So now this is submit demo. Okay, now let's go to the submit demo and create a simple form. Yeah. So later you are going to learn about how to deal with the forms dynamically. So we are creating a container fluid. Yes. I am designing just a heading, registered user. And here we have a form. And just we have a text box, some username, and we have a text box. Input type is equal to text. And so this have a sub button. And you know that button is by default a submit button. So button is by default a submit button. It is by default a submit button. And generally, when you are using the submit button, so we need to define certain actions on form submit. We have to define certain actions on form submit. So, and those we will write in the TS file. in the TS file, we are writing the actions to be performed on submit. So in the TS file, we are writing the actions to perform on submit. So here I write on submit, some action, alert. I will just put a message form submitted. Okay. Now, generally, the submit event, usually the submit event is defined for form tag. It is defined for form element, and submit event will fire up only for the submit button, because sometimes a button can be there. So this is register. Every button by default acts as a submit button until or unless you define the type. So you can define the type as button, then it is not a submit button. So you can define the button as submit button. You can define the button as submit button. You can use input type submit or button type submit. By default, button is submit. If you change that, so then form submit can happen only on submit button. So only on submit button. By default, it is submit. Even you define type submit, doesn't matter. By default, it is submit button. Now the point is, so the form submit, on the form submit button have the ability to submit the form. On form submit, we need to handle certain functions. So in that case, we have to write that event for the form element. For the form element, we need to define the event. So this is submit event, submit. And the submit event will call on form on submit function. And this event will fire up. We have two buttons, submit button and register button. I click on register button, form is not submitted. So register button, form is not submitted because register button is an ordinary button. It doesn't have any submitability. So it is an ordinary button. It can have its own events. You can write your own events. But a submit button have by default have the ability to submit the form. So then it should submit the button. I click on submit button, automatically the submit event will fire up. So submit buttons by default have the ability to submit the form. And when form is submitted, I want to handle certain functionality. Later, when you learn about forms, you will learn how to send the form data into it. How do we send the form data into it? How to collect the form data and use the form data. For that, you need to learn about Angular forms. We need to discuss about them. But every time when you want to collect the data from the form and use the data from the form, then you have to use the submit event. Technically, you have to use the submit event, and submit is an event that is defined for form and that will work for submit button. So it is an event that is used for the form, and it will work for submit button. So technically, all events generally we write for that particular element. But for submit button, there is no click. We don't use any click because submit button by default have that ability because it is a generic button. You know that in HTML we have two generic buttons. One is submit, another one reset. These buttons by default have the ability to submit the form and to reset the form. We don't need to write an event for them. By default, they will submit. But along the submit, if you want some additional functionality to happen, then you can write an event and we can access and configure that event. So this is very important later when you are learning about the forms, how to collect the data from the form and how do we submit the data to any API or any service that we need to learn. That you will see in the next levels, how do we manage them. But initially, this is the technique. This is how you write the submit. Now, in the latest versions of Angular, they have introduced the event. So for submitting, they have introduced ng submit. ng submit. So ng submit is similar to the same submit. But why they have introduced this ng submit? Because they have introduced dynamic forms. So you will learn how to create dynamic forms. And to handle the dynamic forms submit dynamically, so they need one event which can be configured dynamically. So that is the reason why they have introduced this ng submit. So ng submit is the event. ng submit is the event which you can later see how to submit the form dynamically. You can create the forms, you can create the form elements dynamically and submit them. To handle the dynamic interactions, this ng submit is introduced. Actually, why they have introduced it? Because in Angular 9 version, 9 and higher version, they have introduced a form, ng form. ng form is to create a dynamic form. And for these forms, so to handle the submit event, they have used this ng submit, which I will give you detailedly in the forms concept. We will discuss about that. So we can use this ng submit for the form, ng submit for the form. And I am using this ng submit for the form. And you can see initially when I click the submit, that is also working fine. So, but the question is, what is the difference between submit and ng submit? So both are same, but ng submit is used for dynamic forms. When you are configuring the forms dynamically and you want to handle the submit of the form dynamically, then we have to use this ng submit. So other events are same, only this submit related functionality additionally, and this is not there in older versions. So in Angular 8 and below versions, you will not find this ng submit, and this is available from Angular 9 and higher versions. So the main intention of this is to handle the form submit dynamically. So functional wise, it is same. But lot of questions will be there related to this. Lot of questions will be there, which you can answer once you know about forms. Lot of questions will be there. Lot of questions like anyone may ask you questions related to this, but you can answer once you know about forms concept. Suppose if anyone asks you a question like can a page have multiple forms? Can a page have multiple forms? Can a page have multiple forms? So that is a regular question asked. That means, can a page have multiple forms? So what do you say? What is your answer? Can a page have multiple forms, sir? Can a page have more than one form? What do you say? Right? Can a page have multiple forms? So technically, page can have multiple forms. So that means, yes, a page can have multiple forms. So, and every form can have a submit functionality. It can handle submit. Now, important is another question here is, can we define a form? So can we define a form inside another form? Inside another form. What do you say? That means I am saying that, so form. So in that form, so we have another form. Is it possible to define a form inside another form? Can we define a form inside another form? What do you say? Can we have a form inside another form? So we cannot have a form inside another form. So the answer is no. So that means the answer is no, you cannot have a form. No. So, but we can create a form inside another form dynamically. That's what you are going to learn in Angular, how you can create such nested forms dynamically. We can create that. So initially in HTML, it is not allowed. Now another important, can a form have multiple submit buttons? Can a form have multiple submit buttons? Can a form have multiple submit buttons? What do you say? Can your form have multiple submit buttons? So here, so my intention is to tell that, suppose you see here. So yeah, a form can have multiple submit buttons. It's not a problem. Suppose you see this is button, this is insert, another button. So this is update. So another button. So this is delete, delete. All are submit buttons only. You can simply put here submit temporarily. If otherwise, by default, they are submit only. I'm just giving submit. Input type is equal to submit, submit. Now here important is all are submit buttons only. All are submit buttons only. A form can have multiple submit buttons. The answer is yes. You can see I click on update, form is submitted. I click on delete, form is submitted. I click on insert, form is submitted. That means a form can have multiple submit buttons. Now the question in interview asked is, so how form identifies the specific submit click, how it identifies specific submit click. Or the question can be in another way, like how a form can respond to different submit buttons. How a form can respond to different submit buttons. Because if you are defining actions like insert, update, delete, you are performing actions like insert, update, and delete. Then, so how it can handle them? How it can handle them? So that means for insert, it should perform insert operation. For update, it should perform update operation. For delete, it should perform delete operation. That means it must able to perform different operation. Now, can you tell me how it is possible? Is it possible? It is possible. It is possible. Then how it is possible? So actually, it is possible if you can send information about this button. If you can send information about this button, about that button into the submit, if you can send information about the button into the submit, then you can do that. That means actually, so here, remember, so we learned about event argument, $event. $event will send submit related event properties, submit. And remember, this $event is related to form. That means it can send the current object related properties. Object related properties means it can send the information about the form. Suppose a form is having a name. It's a FRM home. On submit, you are collecting that event here, and we are accessing that here. That means here we are defining. So e dot target dot name, we are accessing that e dot target dot name, and I click on button, and you say form submitted. It is showing the form is submitted. That means it has to display that. So it should display this submit. On submit, it has to get that value and display that value. That means you can see this $event should fire up. Let's run this and see. I click on update. You can see it gets the information about the form. it can get the information about the form. That means you click any submit button, it gets the information about the form. Information about the form. Dollar event is going to send information about the form, but we must able to send information about the buttons. So about the controls present inside the form on submit. So if you can do that, then it is possible to handle. So that you are going to learn in the next level. So because for that you need to understand the concept of forms, how to configure the form, how we send the form element value into the form submit. These are the things we are going to discuss in form. Then you will get an answer for this question, how we can handle these buttons. For that, we need to understand about the form concept, right? So later we are going to discuss about that. Then you will get a solution for this question, right? But others are also very important. So we can have multiple forms. We cannot have nested forms, but we can create nested forms dynamically in Angular, and we can use them. We will see that. And form can have multiple submit buttons. Then how form identifies any specific submit button click, that we will see how it can handle and how it work. We can see that, so we can manage that, right? So these are all related to the events. These are all related to the events. So configuring the events and defining the events, right? Now these are different types of miscellaneous events. Even as I told you, this is very important among all these. So because later you are going to use when you are learning about the form, how the forms are submitted, how the value is submitted, how we can collect the value and configure and use the value. You can use that currently because already we learned about general one-way binding, two-way binding, MVC, MVVM architecture. Once you know that, through that you can manage and you can send the information about it. But still we will keep that for a later use, and in forms concept we will detailedly discuss. That means how we can collect the form data on submit. Usually, see, I will show you, because already we learned about how to deal with MVVM architecture, how to configure the options. See, here I am creating a data list and a data term and name and data definition. So we have a text box. Input type is equal to text. We need to configure this as a model. So then we are using ng model. And we are configuring a reference ID, that is txt name. Txt name is equal to ng model, and it is having a name. So name as txt name. So this is one text box. This is one text box. Now we need to send the value of text box on submit. We need to send the value of text box on submit. So there can be name. So how we can send the value of the text box on submit? So below this, I am just giving a button submit. And let me keep the class as BTN and BTN primary. Okay. We need to submit this data to the form. Submit the data to the form. So you can see this is. And when user enters the name, so some name, Samsung TV, something like this, and click on submit, I need to send the detail to the submit method. How we can send the information about this element on submit. So what we can do is we can just pass the reference here. So we can pass the reference here, txt name, we can pass the reference. That means this text box reference is passed into this. Now you can pass its value directly. That means txt name dot value. That means it is sending the text box value. It is sending the text box value. So which we have to collect here. That means here we are collecting the value and we are displaying the value. So displaying the value. So I will just put an alert. I will just put an alert. So here I will simply write name is equal to, we will just put here, so name is equal to dollar and whatever the value they sent, whatever the value they sent. And we are sending here. So we are sending txt name dot value. That means we are sending that particular text box value on submit. So here, so when I enter some name here, some Samsung TV, and click on submit, so that name is equal to Samsung TV. It is submitting that value. So because already we learned how we configure the forms in the UI, then you can use this technique for sending the form data. You can use this technique for sending the form data. That means the details of that particular control is sent into this. The control is sent into this. So that I will just give you this example for a later reference here. Let me keep this example as, yeah, this is the example just to understand. So handling form element value on submit. And for that, what we are doing is, so in the submit demo dot component dot ts, so we are adding this logic. So this is only the logic I am giving here. Just this is the basic logic, yes. And submit demo. So we have submit demo dot component dot html. So we are sending the data in this way. So this is how we are submitting the data. But important is here you are sending only one text box related value. If there are multiple controls inside the form, how you will send all of them? You cannot put a comma and you cannot say that txt price dot value. So you can send only one object here, But in the form, there are several elements. That means there are several controls. That means we have, so price. And price is again input here, type is equal to text. Name is txt price. And this is ng model hash txt price. Txt price is equal to ng model. Now you cannot send both the details into that submit. You cannot send both the details into submit. If there are multiple controls, you cannot send. It may be like even a drop down. So we have a data term like shipped to, and we are using a data definition. We have a select, and we have an option some Delhi. So, and we have an option some Hyderabad, like this. And it is also having name as city. So LST cities, and hash LST cities. And this is also referred as model, ng model, and LST cities is equal to ng model. Now we want to collect the data of all these, collect the data of all these, and you cannot do that. So you cannot send all these details here on submit. Then how you can collect all the details of the forms and manage all the details of the forms? For that, what you can do is you can send the form reference. You can send the form reference. That means in order to collect here, so here another important point is, So you can access the data. You can access the data from all form elements by using form reference by using form reference That means the form should be configured dynamically. The form should be configured dynamically. So that means you have to configure the form dynamically dynamically. How you configure the form dynamically? Generally, we can configure the form dynamically by using this technique. So what we have to do is we have to use ng form. It makes the form dynamic. Ng form is used to make the form dynamic. So once you make the form dynamic, and you can create a reference for this, that is FRM sum register. Now this FRM register is a reference, and this reference can dynamically store the information about all the controls inside the form. It can store all the information about all the controls inside the form. So this FRM register, it is a collection of all the controls. That means individually you can collect the information from every control, and we can access that here. But if you want the information about all controls inside the form, then you have to configure this. You have to define this. So technically, here we need to manage this on submit. What we are doing on submit? So how we can send FRM register? That means on submit, we are sending this FRM register. We are sending the FRM register. So this is to be created as a dynamic form. That is what you are going to learn in the forms concept. But still, so this form is having a name. So FRM register. We are configuring the name for the form as FRM register. And so we are defining the form as ng form. ng form is used to configure the form dynamically. We learned about how do we configure the forms, right? Means general forms. That means already we learned controls. Individually, controls are defined as ng model. Then how you can make this dynamic form? This should be used as a reference dynamically. So same like this we can configure. So what we have to do is, so we need to just simply use the reference name. The reference name is FRM register. And we need to make this as ng form, same like model, right? So the controls are defined as models, and the form is defined as ng form. That means now the form is having a reference name FRM register, and it can collect all the information about the elements inside the form, and it can store in this reference, which we are sending into this submit. On submit, we are sending that reference. Now, another important is FRM register is referring to the form. FRM register dot value. This is the form value. Form value is an object which contains key value pairs. It contains key value pairs. Key value pairs means the control key names are referred as keys and their values as values. So FRM register is referring to the form, and FRM register dot value, this is going to collect all the keys and values of the form elements. That means it is an object. It is an object. So the forms are configured. The forms are configured dynamically by using ng form, configured by using ng form. They are configured dynamically by using ng form. That means syntactically we have to define in this way form, and we have to use some reference name. FRM register is equal to ng form. We have to configure in this way. Now another important is that so the form element values. That means you can simply say that you can access the values of form elements by using so form object, by using form object value. That form object value is defined in this way. Form object value is nothing but we have to define FRM register dot value. This FRM register dot value actually, so it is you can simply say that it is an object. It is an object with the collection of keys and values. The form controls names. The form controls name is used as key, and their value as values. So as value. This is the approach that we have to follow to collect the information from the form. That means here we are using FRM register dot value. This is an object. Remember, FRM register dot value is an object which contains keys and values. These control names are referred as keys. Okay. So here we are collecting that object here. And this object can collect all the form elements details. So I will put an alert here. We can store locally anywhere. Just I am showing an alert here. And here I am defining. So name is equal to $. It should get from obj.txt name. So this obj.txt name, it referring to the value of that particular text box. So that means, for example, suppose if I click on this submit button here, that means I'm entering the details. Suppose I entered some name and I entered some price. So we are not writing any logic for collecting the price currently. I selected city and I click on submit. It gets that name. You can collect all the details now. That means in the next line /n, I want price is equal to, we can access obj.txt price. That is the key. Keys are nothing but, remember, this object collects the information from the form. So by using this form object reference, and you are accessing the detail of price, okay. And here I will use in the next line shipper to is equal to, and we are accessing obj.shipper to, obj.lst cities. LST cities is the name of that particular control. It is accessing the details. And now, and I enter the details here and submit the details. So some Samsung TV and some price and some city, and I click on submit. Then it should collect all the details and display the details. This is how it manages the form submit. So configuring the submit event for the form. That means how we can collect the data of all the elements in the form and submit those details. This we need to do regularly. especially when you are creating forms for APIs and services, we need to collect the data. That means we are not individually managing the data. We are not individually managing the data. There may be several elements in the form. You will have one submit button. On that submit button, you can collect all the form data, And for that, we need to use this submit. Remember, you can use ng submit, or you can just use this submit also. You can just use that submit. Submit is default. That is HTML submit event which you can use. ng submit is used when you are creating a dynamic form. Currently, current dynamic form means you can create a form dynamically and add the form into another form. When you are adding a form into another form, you can make that particular form submitted asynchronously. For that, we can use these dynamic ng submit like events. Currently, I am using just a submit event. That also works fine. That means I am entering some name, entering the price, selecting the city, submit, and that submit so have to work. So now this submit is not working here because actually you can observe here, because we made the form dynamic. So I told you the dynamic form here. You can see here these details. So that means this form, currently the form have a submit button. And on form submit button, so it has to submit this data. That means it should collect and submit the data on the submit. And I click on submit, it is unable to submit the data because already I told you that we are making the form dynamic. This form is made as dynamic. This form is made as dynamic by using ng form. We are using ng form, then it makes it a dynamic form. So if it is not a dynamic form, you can use general submit event to fire up. We will see this in a forms concept. Both situations I will show you. So without this form, how it can submit, with ng submit, how it can submit. Once you are configuring the form dynamic, that means now this is going to be a dynamic form. Just like the controls are dynamic, ng form makes this dynamic. And this form submit is fired up. This form submit is fired up and defined by using ng submit. Actually, submit also will work. I will show you in the forms. So situation we need to decide whether you are configuring dynamically or normally you are handling that. So initially this is ng submit, and you can see that, and we are collecting the form data and we are displaying the form data, and you can submit and the details are collected and displayed. So when you are dealing with the forms dynamically, we are using this ng submit. Only submit also will work. So for that, we need to use another technique of the form. I will show you that in an Angular forms concept, how do we handle that. So technically here, the key point is how the data of the form is submitted and collected. For that, the event is important. We discussed all this under the concept of ng submit. That means we discussed all this under the concept of ng submit. That means ng submit is an event used to define actions on form submit. And we created one example to collect the data from the element. If you want to collect the data from all elements, then this is the approach. In the TS file, I am changing that logic here. So submit demo.component.ts, and in this, so we have this logic defined. And submit demo HTML, so is same. So submit demo.component.html, and here we have all the controls related logic. And on submit, we are collecting the data and defining this. So this is a very important event which we use, especially while working with the APIs and services and all. These are all about how do we use the JavaScript events here in our Angular. Now, important concept is how we can create custom events. Custom events. That means how we can create our own events for the components and use those events. Custom events and working with the custom events. This is very important at interview level for experienced people also. For experienced people, several questions are asked related to custom events in interviews. So we need to be very careful and we need to understand this very well. So how we can use these custom events that we will see in our next session, right? Tomorrow we will discuss about custom events. How do we deal with them? Okay. Right.